checked the watch on my wrist, a Seiko my father gave me when I got my engineering license, the one I'd worn every single day for 31 years, and thought, 72 hours. That's all I had left. The wire was supposed to hit on Friday, $240,000. Not a windfall, not luck. The contractual performance bonus written into my employment agreement in 2009 tied directly to the completion of the SafeRoute integrated traffic management system, the platform I had spent the better part of a decade designing, testing, fighting for, and rebuilding from scratch after the first version failed a federal compliance audit. 72 hours. I'd been CFO and Chief Systems Architect at Meridian Infrastructure Group for 28 years. We were a mid-sized firm out of Calgary, Alberta, not a household name, but respected. We built the operational software that ran toll systems, traffic coordination networks, and municipal logistics infrastructure for cities across Western Canada. SafeRoute was our crown jewel. The city of Edmonton had licensed it. So had 3 municipalities in BC. The federal government had expressed interest in a national adaptation for cross-province freight corridors. The system was mine. I don't say that with arrogance. I say it because it's true, and because what came next matters more if you understand what it cost me to build it. My name is Colin Aldridge. I was 54 years old. The chairman of Meridian was a man named Arthur Finch, 71, old oil money from Red Deer, the kind of man who wore the same brand of flannel shirt whether he was meeting with city councillors or fishing on the Bow River. I respected him. He'd taken a chance on me when I was 26, fresh out of the University of Alberta with a systems engineering degree and a slightly reckless idea about adaptive traffic logic. He told me once that he didn't hire me for what I knew. He hired me because I asked questions nobody else had thought to ask yet. Arthur had one son, Nolan. Nolan Finch was 33 years old. He'd grown up watching his father run Meridian from a distance, summers at the office, attending board dinners, flying with Arthur to Ottawa for lobbying meetings. He had an MBA from Queen's University and a resume that looked impressive until you read it carefully, at which point you realized most of his experience had been in roles that existed because his father created them. He was smart enough to be dangerous and inexperienced enough to be reckless, which is the worst combination you can put in charge of anything. Arthur had been in declining health for 2 years, Parkinson's, slow, quiet, steady. He never complained. He just started handing off responsibilities, first the operational decisions, then the client relationships, then the board meetings. By the spring of that year, Nolan was effectively running the company in everything but title. I had worked with Nolan for almost 3 years by then. I want to be fair. He wasn't malicious, not at first. He was eager in the way young men with something to prove always are. He wanted to modernize. He wanted to reposition Meridian as a tech-forward company, rather than an infrastructure firm. He used words like disruptive and scalable in contexts that didn't quite make sense. I'd tried, more than once, to bring him along to show him what we actually built, how the systems worked, why the long development cycles weren't inefficiency but precision. He stopped listening somewhere around October. I noticed the change in how he handled meetings. He'd started bringing in consultants, a firm from Toronto that specialized in digital transformation, which as far as I could tell meant rebranding the PowerPoints and suggesting we move our server infrastructure to the cloud without understanding what was actually running on it. He'd start mid-conversation to check his phone. He'd override decisions I'd made at the engineering level without asking why I'd made them. In January, he restructured the reporting lines so that my team reported to him directly, with me functioning as an advisor rather than a director. I was told this was temporary, part of a transition framework. I didn't fight it. I should have, but Arthur was still technically chairman, and I thought, foolishly, I realize now, that the man who'd hired me and built something real alongside me for nearly 3 decades would not let it come to what it eventually came to. The bonus was real. Let me explain how it worked, because the details matter. In 2018, when the SafeRoute project was first commissioned, Arthur and I negotiated a performance agreement. The terms were straightforward. Upon successful commercial deployment and federal certification of the SafeRoute system, I would receive a $240,000 performance bonus. The bonus was held in trust by the company's legal counsel, a firm in Calgary I'd worked with since the early days, and was set to release automatically upon confirmation of deployment milestones. There was a second clause. It was Arthur's idea, actually. He said it the way he said most things, quietly, while we were standing outside the office watching the first snowfall of that year. Colin, if something happens and the money doesn't clear, for any reason, on our end, the IP reverts to you. We wrote it that way, deliberately. In the event that the performance bonus fails to transfer to the recipient for any reason attributable to the company, all intellectual property rights pertaining to the SafeRoute integrated traffic management system, including all derivative works, transfer irrevocably to Colin Aldridge. Arthur had looked at me when we signed it and said, "That's fair." I hadn't thought about that clause in years. The bonus was going to clear. There was no reason for it not to. The Monday before the Friday wire date, I was in my office reviewing the Edmonton deployment metrics when Nolan's assistant asked me to come to the boardroom. I remember noticing she didn't make eye contact when she said it. Nolan was sitting at the head of the table. There was a man from HR I recognized. I'd worked with him during a restructuring 5 years earlier, and a woman I didn't know who turned out to be from the external legal firm Nolan had retained. Not our regular counsel. A different firm. The letter was already on the table when I walked in. "Colin," Nolan said. He had the look of someone who had rehearsed the conversation and was relieved to finally be doing it. "We've made the decision to eliminate your position as part of a leadership restructuring. Today is your last day. HR will walk you through the separation package." I remember the silence in the room, not awkward, just still. I looked at the letter, then at Nolan, then back at the letter. "The bonus transfer is scheduled for Friday," I said. "The restructuring is effective immediately," he said. "The separation package includes 3 months' salary and continuation of benefits." 3 months, after 28 years. The HR manager pushed a folder toward me. I didn't open it. "The performance agreement," I said. "The $240,000. That's a contractual obligation, not a discretionary payment." Nolan glanced at the lawyer. She cleared her throat. "The company's position is that the bonus was contingent on continued employment through the deployment period. Legal will be in touch regarding the details." I picked up the letter. I read it once. I set it back down. I thought of my wife, Diane. We'd been married 30 years. She'd moved with me from Edmonton to Calgary when Meridian needed me full-time, had built her own practice there as a physiotherapist, had never once complained about the long hours or the weekends I spent at the office or the times I missed things because a system was failing somewhere and I was the only person who knew how to fix it. I thought of our son, Miles, 26 years old, working as a mechanical engineer in Vancouver. Good kid, solid. Diane's sense of humor and my stubbornness in roughly equal measure. I thought about the conversation I would have to have with both of them, and then I stood up. "I'll need 30 minutes to collect my personal items," I said. Nolan nodded. He seemed almost relieved, like the hard part was over. He had no idea the hard part hadn't started yet. I'd been expecting something was coming. Not this specific thing, not this quickly, but I'm an engineer. I build systems. I think about failure modes, and Nolan's behavior over the preceding months had been the kind of pattern that, once you recognized it, you couldn't stop seeing. 3 months earlier, in November, I'd had lunch with a friend of mine, a man named Bill Kowalski, who'd been practicing corporate law in Calgary for 30 years. Bill was the kind of person you called when you needed someone to think out loud with, someone who would tell you exactly what he thought without softening it for your comfort. I'd laid out the situation over pho at a Vietnamese place we liked near 17th Avenue. The restructuring, Nolan's consultants, the shifting reporting lines, the general feeling that I was being slowly walked toward a door. Bill had listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him. Then he'd said, "Pull out your employment agreement and your performance contract tonight. Read them like someone who's about to be fired is reading them, not like someone who thinks they have job security." I did. I found three things. The first was the IP reversion clause, which I'd known about but hadn't thought about in years. The second was a wrongful dismissal provision. If I was terminated without cause within 90 days of a contractual milestone, I was entitled to full payment of any pending performance compensation, regardless of employment status. The third was something I almost missed, a non-compete clause that had a mutual enforcement condition. It only applied if the company met all its contractual obligations to me. If they didn't, the clause was void. I called Bill the next morning. He was quiet for a moment after I read him the relevant sections. Then he said, "Colin, I need you to do something for me. I need you to make sure that every piece of documentation related to SafeRoute design specs, testing records, correspondence, everything is properly and professionally archived. Not deleted, not moved anywhere unusual. Just properly, demonstrably preserved." I asked him why. "Because," he said, "if they do what I think they might do, you're going to need to be able to prove exactly what you built and when you built it." I spent the better part of November and December doing precisely that. There was something else Bill said that I've thought about many times since. He said they're going to try to save $240,000, and that's going to end up costing them a great deal more. He was right, but even Bill didn't know how right. In February, 2 months before my termination, Nolan had begun negotiating a major acquisition. A Vancouver-based firm called Cascade Systems Group wanted to acquire Meridian for somewhere in the range of $400 million. The deal was driven almost entirely by SafeRoute. Cascade's board had reviewed our municipal deployment data and our federal certification documentation. The system was, as their lead analyst had apparently described it, the most mature adaptive traffic management platform currently operating in the Canadian market. I knew about the acquisition. I'd been involved in early due diligence calls. Nolan had brought me in to explain the technical architecture to Cascade's team, which I did, professionally and completely. What I didn't know, until Bill told me, 2 weeks before my termination, after a quiet conversation with a contact at the law firm handling the deal, was that the transaction had a close date. Cascade wanted to finalize by the end of April. The term sheet was signed. Both boards had approved in principle. The regulatory filings were underway. The acquisition was worth $410 million, and the entire valuation rested on SafeRoute. After Nolan's assistant walked me out of the building that Monday afternoon, I called Bill from the parking lot. The temperature was around -8, a sharp, clear February cold that felt appropriate somehow. "It happened," I said. Bill was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then, "All right. Don't do anything yet. Go home. I need to make 3 calls." I drove home. Diane was seeing patients until 5. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and looked at the Seiko on my wrist and thought about 28 years. The first software deployment we'd done for the city of Red Deer, back when we were still running code on servers that sounded like they were trying to take off. The night the SafeRoute pilot system crashed at 2 in the morning and I stayed on the phone with the Edmonton IT team for 6 hours walking them through a manual override. The look on Arthur Finch's face when the federal certification came through. I didn't feel angry exactly. I felt like something had been confirmed that I hadn't wanted to believe. Diane came home at 5:15. She put her bag down, looked at me sitting at the table and said, "Tell me." I told her everything. She listened the way she always listens, completely, without interrupting, without making the face that means she's already planning what to say. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "What does Bill think?" she said. "He's making calls." She nodded, "Then let him make them." She poured herself a coffee and sat down across from me, and we talked for a long time about things that had nothing to do with Nolan Finch or SafeRoute or $400 million. We talked about Miles and the project he was working on in Vancouver. We talked about whether we wanted to go to Prince Edward Island that summer. We talked about the neighbor's dog, who had developed an apparently passionate interest in our garden. I slept better that night than I had in months. Bill called me Wednesday morning. His voice had the particular quality it got when he was carrying information carefully, the way you carry something full to the brim. "Here's where we are," he said. The termination is clearly without cause. The language they used, position elimination, leadership restructuring, doesn't satisfy the threshold required to void the performance agreement. You're entitled to the $240,000. That's nearly certain. And the IP clause, I said. That, Bill said, is where it gets interesting. He walked me through it. The company had not paid the bonus. Under the terms of the performance agreement, the bonus failure was attributable to the company. They had eliminated my position to avoid paying it, which their own termination letter essentially confirmed by the timing. Therefore, under the explicit terms of the 2018 agreement, the intellectual property rights to SafeRoute had reverted to me. Do they know that? I said. Their new legal team may not have read the 2018 agreement carefully, Bill said. The people who knew it existed, Arthur, the original counsel, they're either out of the loop or not being consulted. Arthur, I said. Bill paused. How is he? Not well, I said. He stepped back from the board in January. Another pause. Colin, I want you to understand something. What I'm about to tell you isn't a threat or a tactic. It's simply what the law says. You now own the IP underlying SafeRoute, which means Meridian does not have clear title to the asset that the Cascade acquisition is predicated on, which means, if that fact were disclosed to Cascade's legal team, as it would need to be in any proper due diligence process, the transaction cannot close as structured. I sat with that for a moment. $410 million. What would you recommend? I said. I would recommend, Bill said carefully, that I send a formal letter to Meridian's board of directors, not to Nolan, to the board, informing them of your position regarding the IP reversion, the wrongful dismissal, and the terms under which you would be willing to resolve this. That letter should arrive before the Cascade deal closes. What happens next is up to them. And if they ignore it, then Cascade's counsel will be made aware through the standard disclosure process, Bill said, and the transaction will stop. I thought about Arthur Finch, the flannel shirt, the first snowfall. That's fair. Send the letter, I said. Bill sent it Thursday morning. It was addressed to the full board of directors, 5 people, none of them Nolan, and it laid out in plain and precise language the sequence of events, the relevant contractual provisions, the IP reversion, and the specific terms under which I was prepared to resolve all outstanding matters, full payment of the $240,000 performance bonus, a negotiated settlement for wrongful dismissal, and a formal licensing arrangement for SafeRoute that would allow the Cascade acquisition to proceed with clear title. The letter arrived at the board members' email addresses at 9:17 Thursday morning. By 11:45, I had a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Leonard Chu, the lead outside director on Meridian's board, a man I'd met perhaps 4 times over the years, a retired telecom executive from Vancouver. His voice was the voice of someone who had been handed information he did not want and was processing it with professional composure. Colin, he said, I've read the letter. I need to understand. Are you prepared to allow the Cascade transaction to proceed if the company addresses your concerns? Yes, I said, that's what the letter says. I need to discuss this with the other directors. Can we speak again this afternoon? Of course. He called back at 3:15. The board, he told me, had met by phone. They had also, he said, and I could hear the careful neutrality in his voice as he said it, spoken with Arthur. Arthur, I said. He asked to be brought in, Leonard said. He still holds a significant shareholding. There was a pause. He confirmed the 2018 agreement, Leonard said, both the IP clause and the intent behind it. I closed my eyes for a moment. What's the company's position? I said. We'd like to meet with you and your counsel on Monday, Leonard said, in Calgary. The company is prepared to discuss resolution of all outstanding matters prior to the Cascade close date. I told him I would be there. I called Bill. He listened to the whole thing and then said, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has seen this kind of situation resolved exactly as it should, Monday then. I called Diane. She was between patients. Monday, I said. They want to meet Monday. She was quiet for a second. Then, good. That was it. Just good. The Monday meeting lasted 4 hours. It was held in a boardroom at a downtown Calgary hotel. Neutral ground, Leonard's suggestion. I came with Bill. Meridian's board sent Leonard and 2 other directors. Their legal team, Nolan, was not there. The negotiation was, by the standards of these things, relatively clean. The board wanted the deal to close. I wanted what was mine. Bill had structured our position carefully. We weren't trying to collapse the acquisition. We weren't trying to extract more than we were owed. We were simply presenting what the contract said and asking for compliance with it. By 2 in the afternoon, we had an agreement in principle. The company would pay the $240,000 performance bonus in full within 5 business days. They would pay an additional $175,000 in wrongful dismissal settlement, below what Bill thought we could get at tribunal, but sufficient and faster. They would execute a formal IP licensing agreement confirming Meridian's right to use SafeRoute commercially, which would provide Cascade with the clean title they needed. In exchange, I would sign a release covering all claims related to the termination and a reasonable non-disparagement clause. Bill reviewed the final documents Thursday. I signed Friday morning. The wire hit my account at 2:47 that afternoon. I was sitting at the kitchen table again. Same chair as before. Diane was out. She had a full clinic day. I watched the notification appear on my phone and thought about a lot of things at once, the way you do when something ends that you've been carrying for a long time. I thought about the night in 2012 when the SafeRoute prototype first ran a full simulation without a single error. Me and 2 junior engineers in a server room that smelled like old carpet and Tim Hortons coffee, watching the output scroll across a monitor at 11:30 at night. I thought about Arthur Finch saying "That's fair." I thought about Nolan in that boardroom, the letter already on the table, telling me the hard part was over. I put my phone face down on the table. I looked out the window at the backyard, at the bare poplar trees in the February cold, at the fence the neighbors had put up last summer that was already listing slightly to one side. Cascade Systems Group completed the acquisition of Meridian Infrastructure Group 6 weeks later. The deal closed at $412 million. SafeRoute was cited prominently in the press release. Nolan Finch was not named in any subsequent leadership announcements. 3 months after the close, I received a short email from Arthur. He didn't use the company address, a personal account I recognized from years ago. The message was 4 sentences. Colin, I heard it resolved well. I should have been more present in the months before it came to that. Take care of yourself. I read it twice. I wrote back 2 words. Thank you. I meant them. I didn't rush into anything after that. Diane and I did go to Prince Edward Island that summer, rented a place near Cavendish for 10 days, walked on the beach, ate more lobster than was probably medically advisable. Miles flew out from Vancouver for the last 4 days. We didn't talk much about Meridian. We talked about everything else. In September, I started consulting a few municipal governments looking to modernize their traffic infrastructure. A startup in Edmonton building adaptive logistics software that reminded me, not unpleasantly, of the early SafeRoute days. I work about 3 days a week. I choose my clients carefully. There's a thing people sometimes say about situations like mine, that I must have been so angry, that the betrayal must have consumed me, that I must have wanted to watch the whole thing burn. I didn't actually. That's not what I felt. What I felt when it was over was something closer to relief, not because I'd won anything exactly, but because the thing I had built was still standing, still running, still doing what I'd designed it to do, managing the movement of people and goods across cities I cared about, in a country I was proud to have built something for. My name wasn't on the press release. My name wasn't in the deal announcement. But I was in every line of the code. I still wear the Seiko. The leather strap is on its 3rd replacement. The face has a small scratch on the left side from the time I dropped it in a server room in 2017. I've been offered nicer watches. I've never wanted one. My father gave it to me because he said a good engineer respects the relationship between what things are made of and how long they last. He wasn't a sentimental man, but he meant it as the kind of thing you carry with you. I think he was right about that. There's a version of this story where I walk out of that boardroom bitter and stay that way. I've met people who did. You can see it in them. The way certain conversations always seem to circle back to the person who wronged them. The way they carry the injustice like a stone they can't put down. I understood that impulse. I'd felt it myself, sitting at my kitchen table that first Monday evening with a cold cup of coffee and 28 years suddenly behind me instead of ahead. But I kept coming back to something Bill said early on, before any of it resolved. He said, "The contract holds because you held to it." He meant it practically, that I had done the work, documented it properly, built something real. But I've thought about it since in a broader sense. The reason the 2018 agreement meant anything was because I'd been the kind of person Arthur trusted enough to write it with. And the reason Arthur confirmed it, from retirement, when he didn't have to, when it would have been easier and less painful to stay out of it entirely, was because of the same thing. Nolan made a decision based on what he thought I was worth in a spreadsheet. He never asked what I'd built or why it worked. He'd inherited the position to make that call without ever earning the judgment required to make it well. And that gap between the authority he had and the understanding he lacked was exactly where everything fell apart for him. Not because I set out to punish him, because consequences don't require intent to arrive. I think about the quality of the decisions I made in those months, not the legal strategy, but the quieter ones. The choice to document everything carefully rather than delete it in frustration. The choice to call Bill and think it through rather than react. The choice to go into that Monday meeting prepared to resolve things rather than to wound. Those decisions weren't clever tactics. They came from somewhere more basic. I knew what I'd built, I knew what was fair, and I wasn't willing to pretend otherwise. That clarity, knowing what you actually stand for and being willing to say so plainly, even when it costs something, is the only thing that held the whole situation together. And the persistence required to see it through. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet, unglamorous kind, sitting at a table with lawyers on a cold February afternoon, reading contract language for the 4th time, holding the line on what was right because walking away would have been easier and wrong. That's not courage in any grand sense. It's just not quitting when quitting would be understandable. Miles called me a few weeks after everything settled. He'd heard the broad strokes from his mother. He asked me how I felt about it all. I told him the truth. I felt like myself again. Not vindicated, exactly. Just level. The way you feel after carrying something heavy for a long time and finally being able to set it down. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "That's a good way to come out of something like that, Dad." It is. I think that's the only way worth coming out of anything.